Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first United States Senate Republican primary debate. Thank you all for coming. It is my distinct honor to welcome to the stage the Deputy State Director of AFP Wisconsin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Annette Olson.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is really a pleasure to see so many faces that are recognizable and friendly. It's really a great night for us. As we begin tonight's debate, though, I really want to spend this time to honor our country, and I'd like you to all join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I am a proud torchbearer. That's what we call ourselves at AFP. Because of our branding with the torch, we call ourselves torchbearers. I do my best to keep the team of AFP torchbearers here in Wisconsin organized, so I'm going to try to keep us organized here tonight as well. We are live streaming the event on our Facebook page. It will also be available once the event is over, and I think Wisconsin Eye is also live streaming. And I encourage you all to utilize the free Wi-Fi network that we have here. The codes were out in the hallway. Please use our Twitter handle at AFPWI. The hashtags for the debate tonight are hashtag WI debate and hashtag WI RIGHT. Now, because I'm a leader and a mom and a grandma, and I'm in charge of organizing, I've already told you that, I now get to remind you a few of our rules. There's no signage allowed in the auditorium. There's no candidate stickers, pins, t-shirts, or other materials. Cannot be worn, displayed, or otherwise visible. You are not allowed to record, reproduce, or transmit from here any of the activities. You may use your smartphone, but please make sure they are set on silent. And using flash photography from a smartphone is not authorized. Any of this egregious behavior will result in you being escorted off the premise. In order to spend as much time on the debate itself, please remain silent during the debate. You may only applaud prior to the debate, so when the candidates are introduced on stage, and then once again when the debate is over. All right, lecture over. I am very honored to introduce to you Eric Bott. Eric Bott is my boss, and he serves as the State Director for Americans for Prosperity. He has a long history of working to advance free markets in the Badger State. Before joining AFP, Eric Bott fought overregulation as Director of Environmental and Energy Policy for Wisconsin's largest business trade association, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. Prior to his time at WMC, Eric ran campaigns across Wisconsin and served as policy director to Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald and Speaker Jeff Fitzgerald. There he ran point on advancing some of Governor Walker's most significant reforms, including Act 10, voter ID, and mining reform. As state director at AFP Wisconsin, Eric leads our team of staff and activists to advance pro-growth, pro-liberty policies. Recent conservative grassroots victories that we have been working on include the passage of generational regulatory reform with the first state REINS Act in America. We are leading the nation. A full repeal of Wisconsin's prevailing wage and the elimination of the state portion of the property tax. Eric Bott also helped to kill a recent attempt to outlaw tailgating.
Woo!
So I give you my boss, Eric Bott.
Good evening. I'm Eric Bott, the Wisconsin State Director for Americans for Prosperity. It's a great pleasure to be here before you tonight, and thank you all for coming. I just want to take a moment to tell you about AFP, our mission, and our vision. AFP's mission is very simple. Our organization exists to recruit, to educate, and to mobilize citizens in support of the policies of a free society. We believe that allowing all Americans, especially the least fortunate, to find their fulfillment and to live their own version of the American dream is critical for all our well-being. AFP is determined to protect the American dream for the next generation by promoting the principles and policies that advance liberty and freedom. Americans for Prosperity has 36 state chapters across the country, more than 3.2 million activists across America. And Wisconsin happens to be one of the larger and most active chapters with over 130,000 activists in our state. We're part of a larger network that includes organizations such as Concerned Veterans for America, the Libre Initiative, and the Freedom Partners Chamber of Commerce. Together, we work to create an environment where everyone has access to opportunity and a chance to obtain their version of the American dream. Tonight, we look forward to hearing from two candidates to share their own visions with us, their visions for a freer society, and their own ideas to help all Americans live more prosperous and fulfilling lives. I now have the distinct pleasure to welcome our moderator for the evening. As one of Milwaukee's most prominent conservative voices, he really needs no introduction. But for those of you not familiar with Dan O'Donnell, he hosts a daily talk show from 9 to 11 a.m. on WISN Milwaukee. He is a tremendous leader in promoting accountable government, in holding politicians to task when they veer from their principles. And for, we all do, right? And for promoting free markets and individual liberties. So I'm thrilled to welcome Dan O'Donnell to begin our debate. Thank you, Dan, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that glowing introduction, Eric, but I can say I didn't save tailgating in Wisconsin. So we're all here tonight to begin a new chapter in a campaign that started almost a year ago when the two candidates who are going to take the stage tonight announced their candidacies, when they first started planning, when they first started talking with their families, when they first started getting the inkling that maybe they would be called to serve their state as a United States Senator, to challenge Tammy Baldwin to compete for the Republican nomination tonight. Well, we get a step closer. Tonight, for the first time, those two candidates will meet on a stage to share their ideas about a freer government, a more open government, a more conservative government, and their vision for the future of Wisconsin. Tonight's debate will feature questions from Americans for Prosperity members. Our panelists for this evening, first, Akash Chogli. He's the Director of Policy at Americans for Prosperity, and in this role, he oversees state policy advocacy efforts, focuses on labor, healthcare, education, and other national issues, tax policy as well. He's a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, National Review, other publications as well. He's a regular guest on Fox News, Fox Business Network, National Public Radio, and several syndicated talk radio programs. A Rhode Island native, Akash received his bachelor's degree from Boston College in 2012 and a master's degree from George Washington University in 2015. He was named to Forbes magazine's 2016 30 Under 30 for Law and Policy. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our panelist, Akash Chogli. Our second panelist this evening is Dan Caldwell. He serves as the Executive Director for Concerned Veterans for America and has worked for CVA since 2013. In 2005, Dan enlisted in the United States Marine Corps as an infantryman. During basic training, he was selected for the Marine Corps' Presidential Support Program, in which he served as a member of the Marine Security Force at Marine Barracks, Washington, and the Presidential Retreat at Camp David. Upon completion of his tour at Camp David, he was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, where he served as an infantry team leader, squad leader, and vehicle commander. Dan deployed to Iraq with the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and conducted operations in Al-Anbar and Nineveh provinces. Prior to joining CVA in 2013, he worked as Chief of Staff for Congressman David Schweikert from Arizona from 2011 to 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Caldwell. And our third panelist tonight, Professor Richard Avramenko. He's an associate professor of political science, chair of the Integrated Liberal Studies program, director of the Center for the Study of Liberal Democracy, and editor-in-chief of the Political Science Reviewer, all at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In his role at the Center for the Study of Liberal Democracy, his mission is to promote an appreciation for the principles and institutions of liberal democracy, including constitutionalism and the rule of law, the meaning and scope of freedom and free markets, and much more. Richard also works to advance intellectual diversity at the University of Wisconsin-Madison by taking ideas seriously that have not always enjoyed sufficient respect on campus. In his roles, Professor Avramenko's groups aspire to be a model of intellectual diversity in action for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Avramenko. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome our candidates to the stage. First, a woman who has been a familiar face and a commanding voice for conservatism and the Republican Party here in Wisconsin. As a state representative and a state senator who stood with Governor Walker and the Republican Party through some of the most challenging but ultimately fulfilling times in this state's history. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to State Senator Leah Vukmir. Our second candidate is a man who has served this country admirably, bravely, courageously, and honorably. A man who has given of himself for his country and for his state. A United States Marine, a small business owner, and a man who believes in conservatism and the Republican Party's values above all, values that he has had guide him through his time in the Marines and through his career in business. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to welcome Kevin Nicholson. Hey, how are you? Now that we've met our candidates, it is time to go over the rules for tonight's debate. It will allow each candidate to give a 2-minute opening statement before we'll dive into questions on healthcare, jobs in the economy, infrastructure, taxes and spending, cronyism, immigration, veterans issues, and free speech. Each candidate will be permitted 2 minutes to answer the questions that are asked. There will be a 1 rebuttal per question, each lasting no longer than a minute, if a candidate was referenced by the other candidate or on my discretion for clarification of an answer. No candidate will be allowed to directly address the other candidate or pose questions to the other candidate. The questions were developed and agreed upon by all 3 members of the questioning panel and have not been shared with the candidates or anyone else. Following the questioning, candidates will receive each 3 minutes to deliver a closing statement. We will be cutting off candidates who go over the time limit. Candidates have received blank paper on which to take notes, and earlier today drew straws to determine the arrangement of the podiums and the order of the introductory remarks. this is very important to ladies and gentlemen in the audience. Applause will not be allowed at any point during the debate. It was only welcome when we introduced the candidates, and it will be welcome when the debate is over. Please, at no point, make any disapproving or approving noises at anything that is said or applaud. Now, each candidate will have 2 minutes to offer an opening statement. And as decided by the drawing of straws, the opening statement first to Kevin Nicholson.
Well, thank you, Dan, and I will try to avoid applause-worthy lines in order to keep with the rules. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Thanks to AFP for hosting. Thanks, Dan, for moderating. I want to take a moment to send best wishes and prayers to those up in Superior, and I hope that first responders are doing okay, as well as those that were affected. I want to take a moment to talk about this race, my story, and what brings us here today. Folks, you may not have heard this, but it turns out at one point I was a Democrat. And I was talking to a pastor in Milwaukee recently who reminded me, and he said, every time anyone gives you any guff about having once been a Democrat, remind him that's the way we were born, because he was too. We were born into families that were Democrats. And we had to figure it out through experience and through life what conservatism is and what it means and how it has the path to the future. And I did figure that out. In my own case, that story winds through the deserts of Iraq and the opium fields of Afghanistan and the mountains of Wyoming, but that's what formed me into who I am today, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it's what made my core what it is. So it starts with me being elected national president of the College of Democrats in 1999, which is a huge applause line at Republican events all across our state. But seeing a party that was broken and had no plans for the future and had no real ability to actually chart a path forward. From there, I would go to run a newspaper, to work for about a year, and then work as a cowboy, because that's what you do after you run a newspaper. From there, I would join the Marine Corps. I'd fight in 2 wars. I would have my eyes opened and my illusions stripped away. I would see the type of foreign policy that Tammy Baldwin believes in employed with deals like the Iran deal, which basically shipped cash on cargo planes to the state sponsor of terror that we were fighting in Afghanistan. My life formed me into what I am today and made me a conservative. I wouldn't trade that for anything. As we look to this election this November, we look to take on Tammy Baldwin, we need something different. We need a candidate that can appeal to people and bring new people into our party and chart a path forward for this country that will save it.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Senator Vukmir.
Well, first of all, thank you, AFP. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Annette, to our panelists, and thank you, Dan O'Donnell, and thank you all for being here this evening. You know, I got into politics out of circumstance, not ambition. I was a mom with a cause. I was concerned about the role of government in my family's life. I questioned the teaching practices in my daughter's classroom. And it started me on an odyssey of going to school board meetings and writing letters to the editor and participating in this amazing civic process that our founding fathers envisioned. A process that each and every one of us in this room not only has the ability to participate in, but I would argue the responsibility to participate in. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Governor Walker as we broke the stranglehold of public sector unions. It wasn't easy, but we did the right thing. We created an economic miracle here in the state of Wisconsin, and we need to take that economic miracle to Washington, where we balance the budget, we end Obamacare, and we build the wall. Washington is looking for strong leaders who are going to stand up and follow through on their promises. I've seen it, I've done it, and I'm going to do it again in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vukmir. We will now get into questions. Since Kevin Nicholson went first with the introductions, each candidate will get the same question, but going first on the first question will be Senator Vukmir. The first question from Professor Avramenko.
Thank you. What do you see as the most significant healthcare problems in America, and what solutions will you propose in the U.S. Senate?
Obamacare, plain and simple. I could talk an hour on this, but I only have 2 minutes. Let's just say, as a nurse, I really understand the issues that are affecting our nation in terms of healthcare reform, and Obamacare is an utter failure. First, we need to return this back to the states. Because in Wisconsin, we were able to take care of our health care problems long before Obamacare. Obamacare made us stop our great programs. We had one of the lowest uninsured rates. We took care of people with pre-existing conditions before it was cool to take care of people with pre-existing conditions. And we had a robust insurance market. So what do? It's very simple. An army of consumers is needed with information and tools with which to make decisions about their health care. The army, that's you, that's me, that's all of us. With information, that means transparency. That means the ability to walk into your doctor and know exactly how much each procedure costs. And then the tools. We have to have the ability to use our own healthcare dollars in an account that is ours, that's portable, that isn't tied to our insurance, to our employer. And then we have to get rid of the mandates that are requiring that every insurance plan looks the same. We need to break that up so we create a real market. You put all of that together, and that's how we change Obamacare. We get the federal government out of it, bring it back to the states. Thank you very much.
Mr. Nicholson, same question to you.
We'll tell you what the answer is not. It's not the VA. That's Tammy Baldwin's answer for the future of healthcare. Tammy Baldwin is one of the first senators to sign on to Bernie Care and say we need more government intervention in healthcare than we have currently with Obamacare. Let's talk about that VA. I've seen that VA held up, and don't get me wrong, folks, I've been a patient. My Marines are currently patients, so I care a lot about that, but that is a single-payer government-run healthcare system. So when Tammy Baldwin turned a blind eye to the VA and those that were dying in Toma and saw their lives threatened, she was also showing you exactly how she would act if she had you in a similar system, a system which completely gets rid of any notion of choice, of price transparency, or consumer control. And those are the things that we need in healthcare. Take every problem that we have in American healthcare. No one knows what anything costs. Just the other week, my son got hit in the head with a hockey stick. He's here today. Connor, well done. Took him in the hospital, and he's sitting there, and he's got a small scratch. Doctor walks in and asks me what my deductible is going to be. Well, I mean, let's just say it's enough for a couple stitches. A couple $1,000s later, folks, after a little bit of glue was applied to his eye, you see the American healthcare system in action. We need to be able to see what things cost. You need to be able to spend your healthcare dollars intelligently and wisely, and at the end of the day, you need to have choices amongst different providers. And if you do those things, you will drive down the aggregate cost of healthcare, none of which can Tammy Baldwin in any way, shape, or form provide as a solution.
Second question, Akash Chogli.
Right to try legislation provides terminal patients and their families with greater access to alternative treatments. Opponents argue that it provides false hope. Where do you stand on right to try?
So if you've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, it's your body. Let's talk about our Constitution for a moment because it applies directly to this question. Your life is yours. Our Constitution makes that painfully clear right at the outset. Whether born or unborn, your life matters. And since your life is imbued with God-given rights, you have the ability, folks, to go out and procure the health care that you need. Now, we have rules and regulations in place for the vetting of pharmaceuticals and healthcare technology, as we should. But those that have been diagnosed, those of us amongst us that have been diagnosed with any type of terminal illness, deserve the opportunity to go out and take a try, to actually save their life and spend more time on earth with their family, their friends, and their loved ones. Because heaven everlasting might be our reward, but we only get so much time here on earth. And let's be honest, folks, that system that's been put in place to protect the patents of pharmaceuticals and healthcare technology companies, it's convoluted. It's been built by lobbyists, insiders, folks that put up obstacles to new market entry. So yes, right to try helps to break down those barriers and give those that have terminal illnesses an opportunity. And let's flip this whole thing on its head and talk about, well, what's the alternative system out there? Yeah, I mentioned the VA a moment ago as a kind of a government answer to healthcare. Anybody heard about that kid over in the UK where his parents actually are not being allowed to take him abroad to seek treatment to save his life? That's the mentality of the left. Those are the people that will take your life from you and deny you the opportunity to save your children's life. That's a slippery slope, folks. They don't get to control our health care. They don't get to control your future. We need to fight and make sure that you retain those choices, and right to try is just one sensible step to help break down barriers and give people on this earth an opportunity to save their lives.
Thank you. Senator Vukmir.
Well, thank you. Not only do I support the legislation, but I passed it through my Senate Health Committee in Wisconsin, and I voted for it and I supported it. And I was disappointed that it didn't pass at the federal level. Senator Ron Johnson, our great senator, has been a champion of this issue at the federal level. And I spoke with him quite a bit during the time that we were trying to get our legislation through. Look, as a nurse, I have actually sat at the bedside of people at the end of life. And I understand what families go through. I've sat there, I've held their hands. We have to give hope to individuals at that stage of their life. There is so much promise in medicine in our country, and there are opportunities that exist beyond what we understand in terms of FDA. But here's an opportunity at the end of life to give people opportunities, or if they have an unusual illness, this is a chance for us to give hope, and it's also a chance for us to learn what works and what doesn't work. And that's why one of the things I tried so hard when we put this bill through was to add a requirement that we had some accountability to this legislation, so we have follow-up, so we see what works, so we can learn from the lessons and hopefully pass those lessons on for other people so that they may receive hope for the cures that they need for their illnesses. So yes, I support it wholeheartedly.
Moving on from healthcare to jobs and the economy, the third question of tonight's debate will first go to Senator Vukmir, and Dan Caldwell has it.
Do you support the recent tariffs on imported washing machine, electronics, and steel? And if so, how do you respond to the argument that these tariffs will increase prices for regular Americans and hurt Wisconsin's manufacturing and agricultural industries?
Clearly, one of the reasons why Donald Trump was elected is because he's a great negotiator. The art of the deal, let's face it. And one of the things I think we know about President Donald Trump is he is going to try to negotiate better deals for our country. Let's face it, China is a bad actor, and they're eating our lunch. We have a $375 billion trade deficit with China. They're stealing our technology. They're forcing our companies to give up their trade secrets. So this is why Donald Trump is saying, you know what, I'm a free trader, and I am a free trader as well, but I believe in fair trade. So I'm willing to watch as President Donald Trump, the great negotiator, tries to negotiate fair deals for Wisconsin, for our country. I'm going to give him that benefit. We will watch very closely how it affects us, because clearly it may affect industry in our state, and I will watch that very closely.
Mr. Nicholson.
Well, I will say I'm enjoying watching an outsider rough up China. I think probably many of you are too. After hearing so many years of so many politicians say, oh, it can't be done. We locked you into these bad deals decades ago, and there's nothing we can do about it anymore, such as it is. Folks, we have a very thin aristocratic class in this country. You know exactly who I'm talking about, who cut a lot of deals that enriched them. There's a reason that those counties around Washington, D.C. are so wealthy, right? The reality is they cut a lot of deals that allowed other trade partners to slap tariffs on American goods, to subsidize the production of American goods, and at the end of the day, did not offer the same advantages to American producers or consumers. I believe in trade. I believe it is important to lift people up in our country and all across the world. But at the end of the day, those deals were not good, and they certainly were not good for the state of Wisconsin. And if you want proof, look at Milwaukee's manufacturing industries. So at the end of the day, as the president moves forward, I believe firmly that his goal is a world without tariffs, and it should be. But to do that and to actually execute it properly, that means that you have to go after those trade deals that were signed. And guess what, folks? We've seen some traction on the part of the Chinese in particular. We've seen the president carve out all sorts of different trade partners that are better actors from those tariffs. And it's obviously aimed at one group. A country that has stolen intellectual property. A country that has slapped tariffs on American products. A country which surreptitiously subsidizes the production. should have known it.
We will, of course, give you, Mr. Nicholson,
Thank
time
you.
to finish your...
Can't let them take that from me. Darn it, folks. I knew they would come after me.
I was actually going to blame Russian hacking.
Oh, yeah, that was the Chinese. I think we all know that. But the reality is that these deals were signed and they were inked and they did not actually advantage the American people. So let's say to our trade partners, let's start over, let's do this right. And that's clearly the president's goal. The goal is to break the tariffs and get rid of those tariffs and to actually enter into intelligent and strategic trade that actually benefits both the American people and our trade partners. That's the goal.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Moving on to the next question from Professor Avramenko.
Do you support the recent tax reform approved by Congress? Do you see the need for future tax reform and relief?
Is that me first?
That is you first, yes.
Okay. Yes, I do, but it's a good step in the right direction. It is not complete. And look, a couple of key things that you saw after that tax reform was passed, which the Democrats all said would never occur. One of which was billions of dollars flowing back into our country and being invested in American companies that actually do and will create American jobs. That's the goal. That's what conservatives have been saying for a long time. If we get tax reform in place that actually incentivizes companies to bring home their earnings, they will, and they did. The other thing that you saw pay raises going to the American people and the people of the state of Wisconsin. That was real. That is real. And we're going to see more of that going forward. People keeping their money, people keeping their resources in their homes and in their households, that makes sense. Pulling resources away from the people of our state and away from the people of the United States of America, it just simply does not work. What we need going forward, the principles that we must always apply, low, broad, and consistently applied tax rates, with as few tools given to politicians as possible, folks, because the insiders, the politicians, they will use those tools to punish the industries that they want to punish, to reward the industries that they want to reward. The less tools they have to actually do that, the better for all of us, the better for you and your families. So keep those rates low, consistent and broad. Allow companies to plan for the future, to invest intelligently. Allow them to keep their capital here in the United States of America and invest it. Those should always be the policies that we put into place. And the only folks that are actually going to do that are outsiders, because the insiders are all making money and getting money from the industries that benefit from the status quo.
Senator Vukmir.
Well, thank you. It was a great start, and I'm really glad that it was passed. Very important step. And as I've traveled across the state of Wisconsin, people are thrilled that they have an extra $2,000 in their pockets. They're not looking at it as breadcrumbs, as Nancy Pelosi called it. It's real significant savings that they are able to not only invest in things that they need for their children, for school, for their families, but it is an investment into our economy. It's going to spur further economic growth. I am thrilled that that was passed. So much more has to be done. One of the things that I'm so grateful for, though, is that we have a record of doing this here in Wisconsin, and we have the ability to continue doing it at the federal level. When I think about what we have done here in Wisconsin and the fact that we have provided $8 billion in tax relief to the good people in the state of Wisconsin, and that is an important step. You need leadership. You have to have people who know how to do it. And that's why I am the person to go to Washington. I've seen it, I've done it, and I'm going to do it again.
Thank you, Senator. The next question to Akash Chogley.
28 states, including Wisconsin in 2015, have passed a right-to-work law, making all labor union dues and fees optional for workers. Opponents argue that these provisions are designed to destroy unions and reduce wages and benefits. But still, millions of Americans today are forced to accept representation from a union they may not want or need. In fact, one study showed that 94% of workers represented by a union today never actually voted for that union to represent them. The vast majority simply inherited a union that was voted in years or even decades before they took the job. Do you support right-to-work laws? And if so, how would you attempt to reform federal labor law to increase worker freedom and to make labor unions more accountable to workers?
Senator Vukmir, you first.
Sure. Well, first of all, not only do I support right-to-work laws, but I voted for it here in Wisconsin, and I feel very strongly about it. This is a decision that states should be making. As somebody who believes in federalism, states should be making these decisions. Look, no one should be forced at all to put their hard-earned dollars into a union that is going to take that money and perhaps use it to support a candidate or an idea or philosophy that they don't agree in. I've spoken to so many people across the state who are so relieved that we were able to remove that from them. It's a freedom issue. You should have the right to work. That's what it is called, the right to work wherever and with whomever you want to work. It's so incredibly important. I'm glad that we did it here in Wisconsin. It's something that should be done on a state-by-state basis, and clearly we have shown that there are 28 states now that have done it. The momentum is there, but I've got to tell you, it wouldn't have happened if states weren't bold like we were here in Wisconsin. And you have to have strong leaders who are going to say, enough is enough, and stand up, and that creates that trickle effect for other states to want to do it. We've led, and more states will follow.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson.
Sure. So this is all about choice, and it's all about accountability. It's about allowing people to make a choice with their future, with their funds and their money. And guess what? That actually keeps unions more accountable. So when and where unions do exist, and where workers have decided that it's for some reason advantageous for them to form a union, they can do so. But it is critically important that that union understand that at any moment, any member can choose to decertify, leave, and not pay the dues. And so unions then are held accountable, both, in politics, but also, too, if they serve a purpose of any kind in advocating for workers, let those workers have leverage over them to actually make a choice. Only a politician would come up with a system that says you must join a union and then basically hand cash over to that union, which, by the way, of course, there's a quid pro quo, and that tends to run to the Democrat Party, where those unions will then funnel cash to those politicians in order to keep that stream coming. Doesn't make any sense. And it never has. It's not been good for workers, and frankly, it's not even been good for those in the union trade. The idea is this: get beyond all that, allow people choice, and in any way, shape, or form that you can, take down any kind of barriers that force people into unions. And we've seen it in our own state with public sector unions. When people are given the option, they choose not to join. That tells me quite convincingly, as it should tell you too, that that union was not providing any kind of market value to those folks. That's proof positive. Because if it was, you don't need a mandatory membership due, right? We join things because they make sense for us to do so. If you're an NRA member, you've made a choice to join the NRA because you believe it advocates for something that's important to you. That's why I joined. But at the end of the day, no one had to make me do so. That is what union members deserve, absolutely, and across this entire country.
Thank you so much. Moving on now to infrastructure, and the next question from Dan Caldwell.
President Trump recently unveiled an infrastructure package that would increase spending by $200 billion, but is paid for by cuts elsewhere in the federal budget. However, there are groups in Washington that want to spend more on infrastructure by raising the gas tax. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, for example, wants to raise the gas tax by 25 cents. On average, this would increase taxes on American families by $300. Do you support raising the gas tax? Why or why not?
I do not. I do not support raising it, and I've already signed the pledge to not raise taxes, and here's why. We do not have a revenue collection problem as a U.S. federal government. And frankly, that tax reform bill that was just passed is the kind of thing that is going to, over the long term, increase revenues to the federal government because it's going to encourage economic growth, which is how you always want to increase revenues to the federal government, is through growth. Low tax rates encourage growth, which actually grow coffers for the federal government. So let's leave that aside for a moment. Now, a gas tax, I'm all about investing wisely into our infrastructure. Let's talk about our roads, our bridges. Hey, we here in the state of Wisconsin, we know about rough roads. We've seen it. You have to maintain them. Like any business, the federal government should put all their infrastructure on a maintenance cycle. You depreciate assets. Any of you working in business know this already. You have to be smart about what you pay for, how you maintain it, and then plan for it to end at some point so you can build a new one. Our federal government doesn't do that very well. But folks, we're not going to go broke off of spending intelligently on infrastructure. We're going to go broke because of our long-term promises and obligations. You know what I'm talking about: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, these promises that have been made to people that politicians cannot reconcile. That is what drives our spending issues. And those that just say, oh, well, let's increase the gas tax, well, the problem is this. They're going to take that money and they're going to spend it on the next who knows what project. We all know it's not really going to go into maintenance and infrastructure, actual maintenance and rebuild. That's the issue. So let's get spending discipline into the federal government. Let's be honest about our long-term obligations. And yes, let's invest intelligently in our infrastructure as the president has said he wants to do. But let's make sure that we're not doing it by taxing the American people any more than they already are.
Senator Vukmir.
Well, I would oppose it at the federal level, and I've opposed it at the state level. For me, it's plain and simple. Obviously, our roads, our bridges are incredibly important. They're the economic arteries that help our economy in our states and across our nation. But the gas tax is the wrong way to go. And I know that the infrastructure package that was part of the budget bill plan fell short in many ways. One of the things that they should have done, and what I would have done had I been there, was to look at the permitting and review process. That red tape that just brings everything down. That is something that we have had a great track record of doing here in Wisconsin. President Trump is starting to do it across the board, but it fell short on the infrastructure package. And other things that you can do that would be also very important would be what we've done here in Wisconsin. We repealed prevailing wage laws. These were my initiatives. We repealed them at the local level. We repealed it at the state level. I'd like to go to Washington and say, let's get rid of Davis-Bacon. That's how we make a difference. We're able to save money. It is absolutely ridiculous that government should be setting wages. It's wrong. We don't believe in that. We are conservatives. Government should not be setting those wages. The market should dictate. And once you do that, you're able to reap millions, as we did in the state of Wisconsin. We can do that at the federal level if we just have the nerve to say we're going to do it. So these are the issues that we have to be doing. We also have to look within, internally, at the bloat in government. I've done it. I've looked at so many agencies. We've made a great inroad in Wisconsin. We can do the same in Washington. I've seen it. I've done it. I'm going to do it again in Washington.
Moving on now to taxes and spending. This next question will be first for Senator Vukmir. It comes from Professor Richard Avramenko.
Recently, an omnibus appropriations bill of more than $1 trillion was passed by Congress, funding large increases in federal spending in almost every area. Where do you stand on that legislation, and how do we manage our spending and debt going forward?
Well, I would have voted against it. It spent too much. It didn't defund Planned Parenthood, and it didn't build a wall. We have to admit that we have a spending problem. This is a big problem. We have to manage our budgets in our homes. We've done a great job of managing budgets at our state level, but the federal government just can't seem to do it. And we have to have people who are bold and who are going to stand up and say enough is enough. We can't keep passing this on to future generations. So what we need to do, the most important thing, obviously, we have to find ways to cut waste, and we have to find ways to look at our discretionary spending. In this particular budget, I believe they blew the caps by $138 billion in discretionary spending. That's ridiculous. And we have to have people who say, we can't do this. We have to look within and find ways. We also have to look at what I would call something that we as conservatives believe in, federalism. We need to bring things back to the states. Why do we have redundancies? We have redundancies in the Department of Education, and then we have it here in our state in our departments of education. And that would be much better, we would be much better suited if we would bring that money back to the states and let the states administer the programs the way they know how and the way they see fit. They're closer to the problems. We need people who are going to think like that. And we've had that opportunity of thinking that way in Wisconsin because we were faced with a $3.6 billion budget deficit. We couldn't just print money. We couldn't just kick the problem down the road. We had to take bold actions, and that's what we did. You need individuals to go to Washington who are going to take bold actions. I've done that. I'll do it again.
Mr. Nicholson.
So this is really a question of, are you willing to push back on leadership? That's really it. I'm endorsed by Senator Ted Cruz and by Senator Mike Lee, two folks that push back on leadership quite a bit at the federal level. So let's talk about that for just a moment and the importance of that. Talked to those senators and I've talked to others about the trap that happens over and over and again. This omnibus bill rolling down the tracks for weeks in advance. Folks, those senators didn't see that bill until you heard about it. 2,000 plus pages landing on their desk with about 48 hours to sign it. That's a real serious problem. What's more, those senators don't have any real chance not just to read it, but to amend it, to change it. And what's more, that money just sloshes into the federal government. Who knows what it gets spent on? We know what they claim, or we know maybe weeks after the fact what they claim it was going to be spent on, but they're not really restricted in any way or shape or form. The only folks that actually have an ability to go there and do something about this are those that are willing to push back on some of the processes by which politicians run the federal government. That means people withholding those omnibus bills to the last second. And you got to be willing to say, no, I will not vote for that. And by the way, this isn't my career. So the worst you're ever going to threaten me with is that you're not going to help me in my next reelection. Okay? I know people that died for this country, folks. That's a sacrifice. Standing up to somebody and saying in an omnibus bill that spends trillions of dollars without any real analysis, and then having them threaten you with your reelect, that's not a risk in any way, shape, or form. That's what senators are supposed to do. And folks, the definition of insanity is to just keep doing the same thing over and over again, sending politicians to Washington who say, I'm going to do it different, I promise. But then they fall in line with leadership because that is the way the system is designed to work. They put in financial incentives, political incentives, they corral you. Heck, they talk about locking you in rooms. The question is, will you stand up? Look at the company I keep. I will stand up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholson. The next question is going to be on cronyism in government, and it comes from Akash Chogli.
The Export-Import Bank is a Depression-era agency that provides billions in taxpayer-backed assistance to big business and foreign corporations in places like China and Mexico. Proponents say it's necessary to promote U.S. manufacturing, while critics say it picks winners and losers and puts taxpayers on the hook for risky loans. Where do you stand, and would you support ending the Export-Import Bank?
So what? It needs to go. It is a byproduct of bad trade deals, and we just talked about this a moment ago when we discussed trade earlier. I think one of the points the president has made once again is we have signed a series of bad trade deals with numerous countries across the world. And those trade deals have created a system whereby politicians have said, well, tell you what, I signed a terrible deal for you, but I'm going to create this bank, and this bank is going to dole out favors to you depending on how much you donate to me. That's what the XM Bank is. That's craziness. That is a broken system. So let's dial it back and talk about what the real problems are here. Let's get back to basics. The deals are bad. If the deals weren't bad, you wouldn't have to justify the existence of the Export-Import Bank in the first place. So let's be honest about this. This is why the president has come forward and said, I am going to bust up these deals, and I'm going to bring our trade partners back to the table and force you to sign better deals so that we don't have to have things like the XM Bank. And boy, folks, I'll remind you, there's a whole lot of politicians that got super nervous when the president started out doing this. Clear to me what his objective was, but I work in business. I'm not a politician. The goal is to actually reset the clock and put deals in place that are better for the people of the state of Wisconsin so that we don't have politicians and would-be aristocrats doling out favors through the XM Bank to try and make up for the bad trade deals that they signed in the first place. The only people that can stand up to that kind of insanity are those that are not part of that system in the first place. If you send a politician to fix that problem, it will never be fixed. You will be talking about it again in 6 years, 12 years, and 18 years from now. The reason I've limited myself to 2 terms and 12 years is because you should not become part of a political class. When you do, you end up thinking that these ideas make sense. We have a real problem. It took about 240 some years, but we reformed an aristocracy in this country, and it was never supposed to be that way. So ideas like this, they don't make sense. Get back to basics, strike good deals with your trade partners, hold them accountable, hold yourself accountable. Trade's a virtuous cycle, it's a good thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholson. Senator Vukmir.
Well, thank you. Yes, I would love to vote against it. The fact of the matter is, as we talked earlier, and we agree on this, we are having a serious problem with these trade deals. And that's why it is so great that we have President Donald Trump, who is willing to stand up and say, enough is enough. We have to look at renegotiating these tariffs, and it is the same with this situation. Look, my friends, it is a terrible situation, but the competition that is out there is great. And we looked at it right here in the state of Wisconsin when we had to deal with whether or not to have a company like Foxconn come here. And we had people tell us, no, it's not a good idea, it's cronyism. But the fact of the matter is, the competition surrounding our state, with other states wanting to bring in and take away that deal of Foxconn, would be great. So state leaders have to stand up sometimes and look out for their best interests. That's what President Donald Trump is doing. And I think we need to have more people like that who are willing to stand up. Now, we talk a lot about leadership and standing up to leadership. And I heard Kevin talk about that. I have stood up to leadership. Sometimes the biggest and the most difficult debates that we have in the halls of capitals here in Wisconsin and across the country and in our United States Capitol are debates within our own party. We all hear about the debates between Republicans and Democrats, but within our own parties, we have to have strong people who are willing to say, this is what our conservative principles are, this is what we believe. And just because you're in leadership doesn't mean you don't keep pushing. That's what I've done in Wisconsin, and that's what I will do for you in Washington.
So as a reference, can I respond?
You may have
Okay.
1 minute to respond.
So when I hear the word leadership, I think crimson and gold. I think the United States Marine Corps. And here's what I was taught, because human life was on the line. You will always do the right thing. It does not matter what the cost is to you. You signed up for it. You don't get to complain. And if it costs you your life, then so be it. That's the price that you pay to lead others, in my case, in the United States Marines. And that's an honor. That's an honor. I don't know what politicians consider leadership to be. It's not really clear to me. I'm sure it's not clear to you either. But at the end of the day, you just simply have to do the right thing. Whether we're talking about the Ex-Im Bank, we're talking about overspending, we're talking about lying to people every single day about what our true obligations are, that's not leadership. You have to go treat a Senate term as a 6-year act of service. Do the right thing while you're there. Who cares if you get reelected? Because if you don't do it right in the first 6 years, we're running out of time and it really doesn't matter.
Thank you. Moving on to one of the hottest button issues of the day, immigration. And again, the question from Akash Chogli.
Do you support a permanent DACA fix for so-called dreamers, undocumented immigrants brought to America as children? And where do you stand more generally on immigration reform?
Senator Vukmir.
We must first build the wall. There can be no discussion about immigration reform until we first talk about the wall. I feel very strong about this. I'm the daughter of Greek immigrants. And my father came to this country with a penny in his pocket and a dream in his heart. And I watched my family come to this country and go through a legal process to become American citizens. They were incredibly proud to become Americans. I helped them study for their naturalization and citizenship tests. I helped them learn English. We are a nation of laws. We must first build that wall before we can have any discussion about comprehensive immigration reform. It is so important that we build that wall, not only because of the flow of illegal immigrants coming into our country, but I'm a nurse. I also think about public health concerns. I remember hearing stories from my grandfather about his relatives being held up at Ellis Island. They could not come into this country because of health problems, yet we're letting people come across who have health problems coming into our states, coming into our country, and also adding to the cost of health care. We also have to have that wall because it is a flow not only of illegal immigrants, but a flow of drug trafficking and human trafficking. So if we're going to talk about DACA, we must first build that wall, seal our borders, and then we can talk about how we bring those individuals into our system.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson.
Well, let's talk about how we got here. I think the American people have been just incredibly clear with their politicians that they like immigrants. They like legal immigration. And they really strongly dislike illegal immigration. And they've been saying this for decades and decades and decades, and what they get from their politicians is nonsense, like the Gang of Eight. First off, whoever calls themselves the Gang of anything, that doesn't make sense. I joined one gang in my life. It's the United States Marine Corps. It's a good gang. I fully encourage you to join. But that's the nonsense that people are just fed up with. It's just garbage. Career politicians go to Washington, say we're going to fix this, and right away they have a nonsense solution, and everyone knows it. The only thing that you can do here, stop illegal immigration. Build a wall, fence. I used to build obstacles in the Marine Corps. They work, as long as you observe them and have overwatch. They work. Then, once you've stopped illegal immigration, put in place a sustainable and honestly sustainable, economically justifiable immigration plan that brings people to this country that want to become citizens, that want to buy into both its rights, but also its responsibilities. People that want to become citizens. That is what we want here. Now, any kind of DACA fix will be part of the post-introduction of the barrier to illegal immigration and part of that sustainable path going forward. But first, you have to stop illegal immigration. And folks, I just want to say this quick because it is darn true. And we as conservatives need to carry this message forward any time this issue is brought up. Any advocate of illegal immigration, and I'm talking about Tammy Baldwin today, or unfettered immigration, is somebody who believes in abusing human rights. And you all know what I mean. It's somebody who wants to bring someone here and make them less than a citizen, someone they can take advantage of politically or economically. They want cheap votes and they want cheap labor. We as citizens need to push back on that, send non-politicians to Washington that come from our citizenry and understand why we're so fed up with this. The people that come to this country should be citizens, and they should want to be, but they should do so legally.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to an issue that has hit close to home here in Wisconsin, VA choice and conditions at Veterans Affairs facilities. Dan Caldwell.
As I know you are both aware, the Department of Veterans Affairs has been rocked by scandal over the last 4 years. Here in Wisconsin, the Toma VA Medical Center has not been immune to this dynamic. There have been reports of unsanitary conditions, whistleblower retaliation, and worst of all, the overprescription of opioids that in several cases led to the deaths of veterans. In Wisconsin and across the country, there are literally hundreds of thousands of veterans waiting long periods of time, often 30, 60, 120 days for critical care. Do you support giving every veteran who qualifies for the VA and uses the VA healthcare system the ability to choose to use their benefits at a VA hospital or at a private sector provider?
Me?
That goes to
All right,
Kevin Nicholson.
That's
yes.
me. Well, I've been a VA patient in the past, so this hits close to home. And I mentioned the VA earlier too, that I've had Marines that have and continue to seek service at the VA. And I want to say this: the VA is no model to hold up in any way, shape, or form. There's good folks working at the VA, to be sure, and I want to make that clear. There are good people in the system. The system's broken. The system is what Tammy Baldwin envisions as the future for healthcare for all of you and for your families. That is the critical reason for removing her from office. I do absolutely unequivocally support allowing veterans to be able to have choice and whether and where they obtain their health care. And let's be real clear on that. I can envision a future for the VA which makes sense where veterans can take their health care out in town for their routine care. If they have suffered from a brain injury, a burn injury, PTSD, or a joint injury, we should have regional specialty centers. Sometimes we can overlap those with active duty military care. We can save billions of dollars this way. We can allow veterans to get care closer to home. And trust me, I talk to veterans all across the state about this. They have to drive hours to get to a VA. And ultimately, we can let them get a higher quality of service at lower cost. That's what you all want in your lives. Why would you not want this for veterans? But let's square the circle on this. And every time Tammy Baldwin wants to talk about health care, let's remind everybody in our state about how she treats people that are caught up in government-run health care. And that is the Toma scandal. What she did was reprehensible. She unequivocally turned a blind eye to what happened in that hospital. Someone died. Other people were abused. She had an obligation to step up, and she did not do it. For that, yes, we'll hold her accountable, and that's how I'm going to beat her this November, and I will. But let's get beyond that, too, and remind everybody this is the idea of the left. Put you in a box, tell you what to do, tell you how long you have to wait. And if they don't feel like picking up the phone at 4 p.m., then they don't. You wait till Monday. That's not okay when it's your kid. It's not okay for our veterans. Allow them to go out in town, get service there, and let's create a system that actually makes sense for this century. because the system we have now was not designed for this century.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Senator Vukmir.
I'm a military mom, so you know that I have concerns about what happens at a VA. And I thank all in this room who have served. I thank Kevin for his service. It is so important that those who fight for our liberties and our freedoms that we enjoy every day here receive the best possible care. And they haven't been. Let's take a look at the VHA. This is one of the largest bureaucracies in the federal government. They have 1,000 medical clinics all across the country, 168 medical facilities. There are 9 million enrollees, and they have a $65 billion budget. You better believe there's bloat in there that we can get rid of. We're not going to take care of that by putting it on the backs of our veterans. That would be unconscionable. For what they have done for us, we owe them. But there are ways to regroup and look within, just like we have done here in Wisconsin, department by department. We've looked for waste and we've gotten rid of it. But in the case of the VAs, we need to give our veterans choice. I have been holding listening sessions with veterans all across the state, and we have over 100 veterans who have joined our coalition. And what do I hear from them? I hear they want more choices, they want more options. There's an arbitrary 40-mile radius which determines whether or not they have a choice. There's a 30-day waiting period that determines whether or not they have a choice. That's wrong. When we look at the original intent of VAs, the first veterans hospitals after the Civil War, they focused in on the issues that affect the veterans, combat issues. So today we're talking about PTSD, limb loss, prosthetics. I think we should be able to focus in on those particular issues that the veterans have. That's where the VA can do a really good job and allow the veterans to have a choice to go elsewhere when it's for their regular care.
Thank you, Senator. Our final question of the evening is on the issue of free speech, and it comes from Professor Avramenko.
From the IRS targeting of conservative grassroots groups to the infamous John Doe attacks on Wisconsinites and the growing censorship on our campuses and in social media, our freedom of speech and expression remains under threat. How will you fight to defend our First Amendment rights? Specifically, where do you stand on so-called disclosure legislation? Proponents often argue this legislation increases public information and awareness about those in the public policy sphere, while critics argue that it will lead to harassment and a chilling of speech. Please explain.
Free speech, the First Amendment. It's the First Amendment because our founders thought it was so important. The framers put that as the #1 amendment because they feared reprisal from a tyrannical government. We all know that. This is the most important of the amendments that are out there. How do I feel about it? I feel we have to protect it every step of the way on college campuses, donor privacy, because individuals should be able to provide funds, donate to organizations and causes that they believe in without fear of intimidation, without fear of expressing their ideas, but yet you're seeing it everywhere. I know what it's like firsthand. The John Doe investigations here in our state, I was a victim of that. An arm of the government was weaponized and used against a citizen. My personal emails were seized, emails that had information about my daughter's health. No parent should have to call their child and tell them that. We need to root this out at every level. We've seen it with the IRS, you're right. We've seen it with the FBI, and now most recently with President Donald Trump's. His conversations were seized, conversations with his attorney. It's wrong. We need people who have been affected by it to say enough is enough. I have seen it. I have done it. And I will go to Washington and stand strong against it there as well.
Mr. Nicholson.
I mean, first, cede no ground. Cede no ground in the public space. Again, your duty as a citizen is to get out there and advocate for the future of your republic. You might do it in any number of different ways. You might be a good father, a good mother. You might choose to serve your country in combat. You may choose to grow a business. You may choose to just work a job, but get out there and be in the public sphere and advocate for a republic that'll stand for not just another 1,000 years, but another 10,000 years. And don't allow the left to take the public space away. I think of the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, the great work they've done in the McAdams case with Marquette, where we had a conservative professor stand up and say, I believe there should be free speech. Well, there should be free speech on campus. And Marquette tried to suspend and fire him. That's insane. That is insane. And I applaud them for, again, the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, as well as Professor McAdams, for shoving back on that and saying, no way. No way. I get worried when I see corporate lobbyists jumping on the side of Marquette and aiding Marquette in suppressing speech. That's concerning to me. And we're seeing that right now. But let's be honest. We have to step up as leaders and be ready to shove back on any inkling of an idea that people are going to take away from us our ability to exercise our free speech. Those disclosure laws that you mentioned, they have been used to try and identify those to support causes that the left is opposed to. So no, I don't believe those disclosure policies should be allowed to go into place to allow people to be intimidated and attacked for exercising their freedom of speech. But again, it's bigger than that. Blow this whole thing out and be honest. If you, in any way, shape, or form, seed the campuses, seed the cities. Let's talk about those cities, because I will go to every corner of this state to include places where people don't always vote for Republicans, like Milwaukee, like our campuses. And we will take this message to them and say conservatism works for you and your family, and it secures a better future for our republic. That's how we win this election.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson, and thank you both. That concludes the question and answer portion of this debate. You will now each have 3 minutes for a closing statement. And since Mr. Nicholson went first for opening statements, Senator Vukmir, your closing statement.
Well, thank you, AFP, once again for hosting this debate. You know, shortly after Donald Trump got elected as the 45th President of the United States, I began this journey that brought me here today to stand before you. I've traveled 60,000 miles, and I've gone to all 72 counties of this great state. And the excitement that we experienced on that election night continues today with the prospect of electing a strong conservative to stand with Donald Trump. I have a track record that you can trust. As a nurse, I understand the complex issues facing our nation. I want to go to Washington and repeal and replace Obamacare once and for all. As an NRA member and proud gun owner, I have defended your Second Amendment rights here. I will do the same in Washington. As a mom of the cause who is concerned about education, I have fought against Common Core. I have fought to expand your choices and options. I will go to Washington and tell the federal government to get out of our schools. As a military mom, you know I want a strong military to fight against the evil forces of terrorism. I have stood with our Guard and veterans here in Wisconsin. You know I will stand with the President in Washington. As the daughter of Greek immigrants, you heard my story. We are a nation of laws. I am opposed to sanctuary cities. I stand with Donald Trump when he says once and for all, let's build that wall. And as a woman of faith, I am 100% pro-life, and I will always be pro-life. There's an image of a 24-week-old baby that is seared in my mind, and I held that baby in my hands as a young nurse. I've never forgotten that baby. We must always defend life. I'm proud of what we've accomplished here in Wisconsin. We have pulled off an economic miracle, the Wisconsin way. We need to take that Wisconsin way to Washington. It is so important that we get that done. That Wisconsin way can make a difference in Washington. In Washington, the stakes are high. The problems are enormous. It's not enough to just elect any Republican to the United States Senate. We can't take chances on the unknown. We have to elect a strong, proven, consistent conservative. I've seen it, I've done it, and I'm going to Washington to do it again. Thank you.
Mr. Nicholson.
I feel like I might be the unknown in that variable. I am. I'm clearly different, folks. Clearly a different kind of candidate. That is what we need. If you think that we can solve our problems by sending the same solutions, you got a couple choices in this election, and it's not me. You should all be honest about that, right? If you realize that our problems are so enormous and so huge, you got to be willing to break the glass and really, honestly, do it differently. And I know you all know that because you're conservatives and you see what's happening. I'm your candidate. We have to do things differently. You all knew this when you voted for Donald Trump. You all understood this when you said that we had to do something differently going forward, or we don't know if our republic is going to be standing in the near future. Folks, I'll tell you a quick story I heard recently about a Madison-based strategist, a consultant, part of the Madison swamp, as it were. He said out loud on videotape that he thought Tammy Baldwin was strategic in her choice of issues, and he thought that she was responsive to voters. Anybody here believe that? Folks at Toma don't think so. It's not responsive to them. I don't think the Iran deal is particularly strategic in that they were sending cash on cargo planes to a state sponsor of terror, but yet she supported that. That is the bubble. That is the establishment. That is why we lost that Supreme Court race recently. If we continue to replay these same mistakes, sending outsiders to do a job that citizens need to go, sending insiders to do a job that outsiders need to go and take care of, we're going to be sitting here talking about the exact same problems in 6 years. 12 years are going to be worse. 18 years, I don't know what's going to be left, and neither do you. The time is now. We have to move. We have to move with an imperative and understand the true severity of our problems. That's the message from my campaign. That's why we're winning this primary today by about 20 points. That's why we've raised over double the resources of our primary opponent. That's why Tammy Baldwin's on the run. And that's why we're going to beat her in November. Thank you.
Senator Vukmir, you were referenced in that. Would you like 1 minute for a response?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I didn't realize I could do that with during the closing remarks, but I would gladly take it, especially since the time clock doesn't seem to be working, and I think that my opponent had more than the 3 minutes for his close, and he took advantage of that. Well, let's talk about that, because it's clear that there is a difference between the two of us. And I think it's very important that we understand. I appreciate, as I've said before, I appreciate Kevin's service to our nation. But he's going to have to prove what his conservative track record is. I don't have to prove that to you. You know what my track record is. We know more about Kevin's track record as a Democrat than we do about his track record as a Republican. And I think that is the issue. Who can you trust to follow through and make sure that the conservative principles that every one of you in this room holds near and dear are the conservative principles? I'm going to keep talking. That's how you buck leadership.
Senator Vukmir, thank you. Mr. Nicholson.
Well, let me finish. I want to make sure that our conservative principles that we hold dear are the principles that our nation were founded on. Those are the principles that I stand for, and you can count on me because I have done it here in Wisconsin. I'm not changing my stripes. I've stood up to my leadership. I have stood up for you. We have an amazing team here. What we have done in Wisconsin is remarkable, and we have done it together. And I am actually, it's a personal affront to hear that party being maligned, that party being told that the reason why we lost that election was because of some comments by somebody. Everyone in this room stood with the governor and with me when that Capitol was taken over under siege. You were there with us. You never wavered. You lifted us up. And we made the right decision, and we did the right thing, and we changed Wisconsin.
Okay. Senator Vukmir, in the interest of fairness, that was 2 minutes. Mr. Nicholson, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you. My track record? My track record, I would look to the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan if you wanted. That's where I'd look first. I know that doesn't mean much to certain politicians. I know that darn well.
That's wrong.
Those that I have served with know that darn well.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
I'm going to be blunt. For those that have said that leading Marines in combat during the course of 2 wars does not qualify as conservative credentials, you need to look inside them and decide what they think conservative credentials are. Defending the Republic, making sure that it stands forever, making sure that I bring home American citizens that decided to sign on the dotted line to defend the Constitution. That's real. That's my track record. I'll sink or swim by it, and I'm proud to do so. You want to build out beyond that? Time in industry, time as a father, time as a husband, things that make you a real citizen and honestly immerse you into the culture of this country. That doesn't count as conservative principles to some. I don't have to answer that. I know you all know better. This country will sink or swim because citizens stand up and say we're sick of the political class flushing its future down the toilet. That's the truth. That's the political class that Tammy Baldwin is a part of. We will not solve our problems by sending more of the political class to Washington, D.C. to do more of the same. And again, our state full well recognized that when we voted for Donald Trump to be president of the United States. And to now think that we can pull back and go back to doing the same old, and somehow it's going to work, denies reality. That's the mentality we need to get away from. That's the mentality that's going to save the future of this republic and not just win this election, but win the future of this country. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to
Ladies and
respond.
gentlemen.
No, Dan O'Donnell, please, can I just say one thing? Because I have to respond. That was a very, very low
Senator-
blow to say that I don't respect you. And I want to make sure everyone in this room knows that. I respect your service, and I'm grateful for your service, Kevin. And I didn't really, that was really a low blow on your part. And I would ask you to apologize. I get it as a military
Senator,
mom.
we do have to.
We must respect our military. I do.
If it makes you feel better, I feel respected.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to end the debate at this point. Ladies and gentlemen, State Senator Leah Vukmir and Kevin Nicholson.